So I'm going to talk about degrowth, but I'm not really going to talk about the biophysical aspects of degrowth. I guess I'm sort of going to take it as a premise that one major goal of ecological economics is to radically reduce the material and energy throughput of the human economy, at least in wealthy nations like United States and Canada, for example. Just because if we can start there, then we can get a little further in the presentation, I think. Yeah, so this, you'll notice by how the slides look, is a presentation that at a conference back in June I gave right after Joe, or I guess we did it collaboratively then. So hopefully they still go well together, and it really has to do with this. Well, what I'm going to start is, I guess, this evolution versus revolution, and I think Joe's point that like which evolutionary paths lead towards something revolutionary and which ones don't is an open question that we need to think really hard about all the time, especially when like this morning when Peter Brown talks about how he sees ecosystem services as a concept that's maybe evolutionary, that maybe builds on neoclassical economic concepts to include insights from ecological economics, and there's a lot of debate. How useful is this? How not useful is this? On that one, I think with ecosystem services, it's especially complicated because you get to this question not just of if it's useful to think of how ecosystems serve humans or their intrinsic value, but also like, does that get value in terms of money? So anyway, the definition of economics, the allocation of scarce resources, it's been put in different ways, but this word scarce, up until Joe's presentation a minute ago, doesn't get questioned that often. And I want to suggest a different way of thinking about economics, not saying that we need to redefine economics entirely, but if we look at it a different way, some ecological economists have come to some conclusions that I think are somewhat useful. So okay. So ecological economics has maintained the focus on scarcity a lot, especially with scarce resources that are limited on a finite planet that we can only have so much of, and then scarce waste sinks into which to dump our wastes from using the materials and energy, the other side of the throughput. Yeah, that's been the thing. So if we think about economics as a study of the surplus, which maybe is more constructive than just destroying neoclassical economics, which has been done quite well by many of the people at this conference and involved in the discipline. When you think about economics as a study of the surplus, there's some important insights, because you realize that the surplus is what allows human civilization to live, and this is sort of following on a lot of the folks who study net energy or energy return on energy investment, the idea that we have to have more energy than we invest into getting energy available to be able to have culture or free time or material wealth, or just to survive, even just to have food available for eating, for example. So and it also sort of highlights how political economics is, because who creates the surplus, what the surplus is, how big is it, who gets it, how is it destroyed, what parts of it are invested, and who makes all these decisions are political questions. So the font changed on the PowerPoint at some point, but that says political ecological economics. And that's not to suggest the creation of a new discipline, just an acknowledgement of the fact that the economy is one place where politics is played out, and all economics is thus political economy. And so focusing on scarcity often gives this illusion, especially through neoclassical methods, that there are right answers, that there's a right way to allocate scarce resources. And that's the efficient way, of course, so that we can get the most from our scarce resources. And acknowledging that everything's political in the economy realizes that there aren't right answers. There are only different answers, and winners and losers, people who benefit and bear the costs of different decisions. So who gets to decide is really important when you think about it in terms of surplus. So how has the surplus been spent? How is this energy and materials? How is this net energy, or that which is gained beyond the minimal requirements for survival of a community? How's the surplus been spent? Now this is super overgeneralizing and inexact, this table, but I put it up there so that because the word surplus gets thrown around, it means a lot of different things. The way I'm thinking about surplus is how civilization spends that which it gets that it doesn't need just to survive. So the economics of the surplus could work kind of like this if you put it in a chart. And I base this chart off of, or a flow chart off of one that Jorgos Kallis from the Autonomous University of Barcelona made in a presentation that I went to and liked a lot. So if you have Jorgos Kallis, he's an ecological economist in Barcelona. He and a major figure in theory of degrowth, or the hypothesis of degrowth, as he would call it. So you need capital to produce, and you also need human labor and nature's gifts to produce. You need resources and people and some sort of wealth to produce. And of course you need energy, because without energy, capital is a sculpture and labor's a corpse. So then you produce, and you have to invest some of that production into reproducing ourselves, into eating and surviving and making new generations of people. And there probably should be another arrow from production to nature's work, because some of the production also needs to be invested in helping nature reproduce itself if humans are participants in the ecosystem. And then that production, or the surplus that remains after that which needs to be invested in reproducing humans and nature, can go to two things. And one is investment to replace capital stock as it wears out, or grow the capital stock if you invest more than depreciation, and then consumption, which is like unproductive squandering, which is parties and rituals and different ways of destroying the surplus. And so when you look at this and you think, how can we achieve degrowth biophysically? How can we reduce the material and energy throughput? We have to not divert surplus from investment to consumption, because investment makes the capital stock bigger to produce more next time. And that's what capitalism has done. Capitalism has been very, very good at creating big surpluses and systematically investing them to create more capital to have a bigger surplus next time. And we are where we are in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss, largely as a result of that dynamic. So what I'm saying is that we need to throw more parties, basically. So this comes from this idea of DuPont's, which was written in a book by Georges Bataille, who is a pretty controversial philosopher, and I've not read the book, actually, I admit. Apparently it's pretty dense, and I probably wouldn't get as much out of it as the smart people who read it before me and worked on that theory. And some of those smart people are these folks at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, who in the epilogue of their book, Degrowth, the Vocabulary for a New Era, sort of built on this idea of DuPont's, which there's probably a lot of French speakers in the room who can explain a lot better than me, but it means expenditure, and it also means something else that sort of has to do with what I was talking about on the last slide. I would love to hear someone for whom French is their native language describe to me DuPont's, because apparently it's not translatable directly into one English word, because languages don't work like that. So anyway, that's super controversial, because we're saying that you have to destroy the surplus and maybe be a little less thrifty with it, with that sector. I think a lot of environmental solutions are are very much focused on efficiency and reducing consumption. And what I just implied was that maybe we should think about how to divert more of the surplus into consumption, less into investment. And it works theoretically, but then you think about where we are right now, we need to reduce consumption, right? Climate change is a problem. So that's something that needs to be thought about really hard, because there's a lot of disagreement between that. A lot of people would say there is no surplus right now because we're already consuming way more than the biosphere can take. But where has efficiency gotten us is an important thing to remember, and the Jevons paradox, I'm sure many of us are familiar with it, which is that efficiency backfires, and that's true of every time. There was a study done by MIT that came out last year that looked at like 60 different materials and industrial processes, and as they got more efficient, the resources upon which they relied, the use of those resources increased, and except for like 4 things: asbestos and ozone depleters and stuff that's internationally regulated. So it shows that we need to be very intentional about decreasing things. When you get new energy sources, they don't replace the old ones, they add on top of the old ones, is what this chart's basically showing. So sort of to synthesize a little bit from my presentation and Joe's, achieving the goals of ecological economics means shifting to more public and collective means for governing the economy, both investment and consumption. And Joe's was all about the investment side of that, and I'm saying consumption because if we take that sort of first argument that I made, that the economy is very political, and all the decisions regarding the surplus are political decisions, then if democracy is something we value, there's an argument to be made for deciding more collectively about what happens to the surplus, and that collective decision making might steer the surplus more toward consumption and less toward investment, or at least, as Joe is making the case, investments that are more sustainable and more just, because everybody would have a say. So that's re-politicizing economics, and then thinking about what that has to do with the economy. The idea of letting the market decide, or getting the market right, I think, which is the very neoclassical way to look at environmental economics. There's nothing inherently right about that. It is certainly a good way through one mechanism, the price mechanism, as Joe was talking about, and our supervisor Josh always likes to talk about. Through one mechanism, the price, that piece of information is really good for sort of coordinating large groups of collective action, but it tends to be not that democratic in an unequal society. I think that was all I wanted to say. Yeah, thank you.